Dodging to the side, Hunk cut off one of the creature's tentacles with his machete and fired at the thing. The creature grunted with a mixture of a man and a monster voice, as if two people were in the same body. Hunk advanced against the creature and plunged his machete into its neck, followed by a kick to its legs, knocking the monster that was wearing Vinci's now deformed skin. The creature falls, and Hunk shoots it in the head. The monster roars again and gets up quickly, ignoring the bullets piercing through his body. In one swift movement, the creature tried to pierce Hunk's chest, who simply dodged to the side and counterattacked with a kick to the chest, causing the creature to stagger back a few steps. The monster brain-danced its tentacles arms, trying to attack Hunk, who dodged again by crouching. The creature might not be very fast, but it was certainly very strong, as its tentacles destroyed the concrete walls with some ease. The monster then leapt at Hunk, who rolled to the side, hearing the sound of ground cracking due to the force imposed by the creature. The ancient landed a strong kick to the monster's head, which was temporarily stunned, and grunted again when the ancient fired a hail of bullets to its body. The monster roared again and leapt towards through the concrete ceiling to the apartment above where they were standing. Hunk grunted angrily and activated the heat vision of his mask, as well as the audio visible in his lenses. Now his mask would point in the direction of a nearby noise, no matter how loud. Whatever it was, a grunt, a footstep, a nail falling to the ground, as long as he was within the area, at least 6 meters, he would catch. In other words, it was impossible for him to be taken by surprise, which completely nulled the creature's way of fighting, which was currently relying on the element of surprise to kill him. Perhaps it was how he managed to kill Vinci. That thing would never have managed to hurt him otherwise. Hunk quickly reloaded his rifle and walked with heavy footsteps out of the room. His slow but imposing footsteps echoed throughout the empty building. That thing knew where he was. At the moment, it had a certain advantage. It could attack him from literally all sides. From his tactical vest, he pulled out 2 smoke grenades. He threw one of them into the apartment behind him, and the other into the corridor he was in. The smoke from the grenades was thick, with the intense enough to cut through the machete. The ancient switched to the view mode of his lenses once more, and slowly and intently, he positioned himself, letting himself be swallowed up by the smoke. The cloud of smoke dissipated in a matter of minutes. Silence lingered over the deserted place, a silence so intense that it was deafening. The creature slowly emerged from its hiding place, climbing down one of its holes of destruction in one of its rooms beside the apartment. The creature possessed a level of intelligence that was far advanced compared to known biological weapons. It watched as the corridors looked as if looking at Hunk, inattentive to any movement made by the agent. The creature roared and turned and staggered towards the body of the fallen woman. Its tentacles of its arms flailed around frantically and advanced towards the woman's body, penetrating her body and sucking out her fluids, devouring her flesh as the creature itself knelt in front of her. The creature grunted and staggered as the structure of its body changed. Its muscles deformed and moved away as if it were alive. Its face, once of that of brave, skillful agent, slowly transformed that of a woman. "Please," her voice said, not exactly, still with certain dread mixed in, but almost a perfect copy. "Help me." The creature stood up after completing the transformation, turning around again and began to walk its way down the empty corridor with uncertain steps, as if it was still getting used to the body. "Is anyone there?" the creature asked, looking to each side for its prey. Anyone looking from the outside would have it was just a scared, lonely woman looking for help. The creature took a step forward. The ground creaked. The plank seemed to give away. Its cursed eyes lowered to the ground. The explosion occurred at his feet, causing the monster to fall to the small area of the sewage below. The monster roared in a mixture of inhuman voices. Its arms flexed up to get up, but as it grunted again, it felt the weight just above it. Before the monster could do anything, even react, Hunk began stabbing his machete several times into its neck, causing blood to gush from its newest wound. The fiend's tentacles flailed about frantically, violently, but Hunk only stabbed harder and harder, each blow more lethal than the other. The ancient stood up after decapitating the thing, attaching the grenade to its body before turning around and jumping upstairs. Whatever it was, he hoped it would stay dead, and he hoped he wouldn't find another like it. The grenade exploded as soon as he left the building, avoiding looking at the disfigured body of the civilian who had died unfairly. He just hated it. When more of those damn viruses fell to the hands of filthy human beings, he hated when tragedies like this happened. Hunk stepped out of the building and activated his heat lenses in his mask. His eyes ran around and his mask picked up sound waves very close to where he was. Great, more infected. He heard the notification noises of his watch and raised his arm. The screen followed the message from William. He hoped it was good news, considering Albert's track record and everything was capable of, and he didn't have very high hopes. Sighing slightly, Chris cracks the bones in his hand and moves his head around, stretching the muscles in his neck. It had been a full and tiring day. Settling into his chair, he leans forward slightly and begins to eat his dinner. The cool night wind was blowing through the small makeshift tent he was in. The site was just outside of Philadelphia, and a sea of tents and military vehicles could be seen almost kilometers away. It was a tragedy, but all things considered, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Albert would have wiped out the entire city with that. Ghost was right. The attack was more about distraction than extermination. And in a way, Wesker had managed to keep them busy with the attack. With luck, Ghost would come up with an idea with some good news. Chris? The man focused his eyes on the entrance of his tent, watched O'Brien approach at a slow pace. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Redfield swallowed some of his food and took a few sips of his water, placing his bottle next to his plate. No, it's fine. I was going to call you anyway, he said, going back to focusing on his food. Most of his wounded are being treated currently, and some have already been released. But unfortunately, some of them died of their injuries, among some of our men, O'Brien said, and Chris sighed slightly. I figured. We've had that many losses? He asked, leaning back in his chair. Not many, maybe about 7 of our men. If you consider the scale of the attack, it's been almost a miracle we lost so little, O'Brien replied, and Chris lowered his head. He didn't see it as a good thing, but it was a miracle that they had lost a few men, and it would have been a miracle if they hadn't lost anyone. But they didn't need a miracle. They needed were the weapons and the license to act internationally without the need of permission from the local authorities. What about the others? I saw the army stuff some casualties too, he asked, and O'Brien ran his hand through his hair. They suffered significant casualties. So did the USSOCOM. But the situation has already been resolved. We'll do a sweep of the city together with DSO. You did a great job today. Take it easy tomorrow, Brian said. Before Chris could complain or object, they saw Jill enter the tent. Chris, sir, she greeted, followed by Parker, who was just as tired as Chris. Jill, Parker, O'Brien greeted them back. His eyes quickly focused on the masked figure who had entered the tent with them. O'Brien had only heard the masked figure who had just now joined them. Although he didn't like being able to meet the figure, he respected Chris's decision after all. Chris was also the leader of that organization. He only had heard stories and a few recordings up close. He seemed taller and seemed more intimidating. Because of the moment that their eyes met, he seemed to stare deep into his soul. The blue gaze seemed to run a little cold. For a few moments, O'Brien just thought that the whole thing in his head and looked away. Well, O'Brien, Ghost, Brian. I think you guys probably already knew. Parker introduced them. It was obvious what was going on between them. Ghost approached at a slow pace, and his eyes staring steadily at the man in front of him, who, like all the others, knew of his crimes and avoided his gaze directly, then calmly extended his hand towards the BSAA leader. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person, Chef O'Brien," Ghost greeted them, his voice now low but audible enough for O'Brien to recognize his way of his men calling him. The man swallowed some saliva and then shook the agent's hand, and finally looking at him in the eye, then regretting it. He felt as if the blue of that gaze was going to consume his body completely, like he never felt this kind of pressure. He was used to dealing with powerful leaders. This was different. "Likewise," he said after a few moments, ignoring the strong handshake, almost sighing with relief as he turned to Chris and broke eye contact. "So we're in deep shit or not at all?" Parker asked, taking a seat opposite to Chris. "Depends on how you look at it," Ghost replied, taking the laptop out of his backpack and placing it on the table. While taking care of the attack, William went after Wesker and at his Umbrella main facility. He reached into his main network and pulled out the small projector from his backpack, plugging it into the laptop, showing the screen in black against the tent. "Albert and is still infected with that poison we made, but he still has most of his abilities. They fought. Unfortunately, we lost contact with William," he replied, showing the message that his boss sent. "What the fuck? So you meant Albert escaped and William died?" Parker asked. It was certain that Albert must have escaped, but it was uncertain to see if William was dead. You see, they both have very similar blood. As you could see from the message, William was captured earlier so his brother could get his blood to cure himself, as he escaped before Albert had the chance. It's likely that Albert captured him again and completed his objective, Ghost said, opening the container another screen to the message. "Damn, so in other words, Albert's going to heal himself and finish his plan?" Jill asked, his arms crossed, standing a few steps away from O'Brien, who was just watching everything in silence. That's when some good news comes in. Umbrella's main facility was finishing production of Albert's virus, called Ouroboros. William and his team managed to stop the production of the virus, and unfortunately destroyed the facility. The missiles have been disabled, and it's been estimated that Umbrella has lost more or less 60% of its power, he said, showing the recording of some of the cameras attached to each of the agents on William's team. They watched as the men broke into the computers and hacked into their system, getting all the information they needed. With that, despite Albert's escape, we restricted Umbrella's movements and managed to find the other hideouts and laboratories scattered across East. The screen then switched to the world map. Red dots appeared on different points of Asia: China, Philippines, Korea, and finally Thailand. We can move the teams to destroy each of the laboratories. My team will be leaving soon for China and Korea. I contacted Hunk briefly. We didn't get to talk for long, but I have sent him everything he needs to know about both him and his team, Ghost explained, running his eyes over the small group there. "Good news, at least. Not only this is going to be a downfall for Umbrella, but it's greatly going to restrict Albert's movements. He'll have to go nowhere to go," Chris said, his arms crossed and leaning back against his chair. "Exactly. He may even heal, but his plan is over. With that, it's only a matter of time before we find him. Whatever he plans now, he won't be able to pull it off in time," Ghost said, leaning his arm on the table. "But even so, that's no reason to underestimate him. He's incredibly intelligent, not to mention the most unpredictable. We can't let our guards down." "I agree. Is your boss going to be okay?" Jill asked. "William's death, while possible, is unlikely, but at least not until Albert finds a permanent cure for what he has. Hopefully we'll find him before that happens," Ghost said, leaning his back against the chair, also crossing his arms. "What about your partner, Hunk?" Chris asked, and Ghost looked at him with certain curiosity. "He's fine. He was busy with some infected, but he should be leaving the country by now. Unfortunately, some members of his team died. Apparently there was an infected who was able to transform himself into the person he killed." "What the hell?" Parker exclaimed intentionally. "Transform? Like become the person it killed?" Jill asked in disbelief. "Exactly. I saw the video he sent me. The creature would perfectly imitate an ordinary person, imitate their voice, and even formulate sentences. It was intelligent, but unfortunately it wasn't that strong," he explained. "Crap. First 5 meters tall monsters, superhuman abilities, and now frickin' skinwalker? What else is there to appear the Illuminati? He said to no one in particular. No, they're dead, Ghost said, blinked a few times in surprise. Really? Parker asked, his eyes wide. Do you really remember the disappearances of those United Nations ambassadors? He asked with his arms crossed. Really? Parker asked again, still not believing it. Okay, yeah, I knew they existed. So we do have to go to the remaining Umbrella facilities and while shut down. Albert, easier said than done, if you ask me, Parker said, still leaning on the table. We can ask the USOCOM for help, and I'm sure DSO will make some agents available to help us, Brian said, and Ghost slowly turned towards the man. Only the BSAA will participate in this mission, and that's final, he said loudly and imposingly, carrying a little the look he looked at O'Brien sent him. Really? This Umbrella and Albert Wesker we're talking about, Parker argued. I'm not going to against their participation and realization to Wesker, but when it comes down to Umbrella, the only few members of the BSAA are aware and take part of the mission. I won't risk DSO or USSOCOM or the frickin' army to get their hands on whatever virus samples Umbrella still has, Ghost argued back, now leaning against the table in slow movement. Are you serious? I'm sorry, I know you're a skilled agent and your conditions are somewhat unique, O'Brien began hesitantly, but went on the way. But you're not part of the BSAA or any other re-owned organization. We need to contact other institutions. You're not the authority here. Ghost sighed and stood up slowly. Without removing his hands from the table, he felt Chris's sharp gaze on him. He didn't want to seem like a threat at the moment. It would only bring useless enmity. I don't care. My organization may not be re-owned, but it still has 1,000 times more incompetence. And so that I know everyone at DSO or USSOCOM and the BSAA. I trust you for that. Because I know everything about you, Ghost said. His sentence was slightly a whisper voice, a lower tremble that sounded strangely like a threat for O'Brien's taste. And because I know all about you, I say you won't be part of this mission. Any objections? He ran his eyes around, focusing on them again. O'Brien shortly afterwards. Is that good enough for you, sir? O'Brien swallowed a bit of saliva, a slight worry plaguing his chest. He was really serious about knowing everything. He had no reason to pretend after all. It was clear that he had a lot of information about a lot of things. Yeah, but it could be bluff. It wasn't as if he had his eyes on everything. It was a bluff, and it had to be a bluff, right? Yeah, okay, fine. He wasn't going to risk it. I have to say, Ghost, sometimes I don't like the way of yours at all. You act like you know better than all of us, Ghost said. Chris said, getting up and picked up his empty plate. But your help is undeniable, so I'll just swallow it, he said, as they watched a man leave the tent with his empty plate in hand. Well, I think we better get some rest. Let us know you're ready, Ghost, Jill said. Are you going to stick around? I'll be close. My team will pick me up in 20 kilometers from where we are when we're ready, Ghost replied, and Jill nodded, leaving the tent after Chris, followed by Parker, and finally O'Brien. I hope you're doing the right thing, O'Brien. The agent's voice made the man stop before leaving. He turned his head slightly to the side, looking at him over his shoulder. What do you mean? Was that a threat? O'Brien asked in a low tone, and Ghost snorted in derision. Come on, don't play tough guy now. I know everything. I know about the torture civilians that your soldiers had committed a few years ago. I know about the crimes you covered up. I could tell Chris, or rather I could send him the evidence, he said. O'Brien turned to him with a serious look on his face. If he was really telling the truth, then his career was practically at his mercy. A complete masked stranger with unknown origins. Brian swallowed some saliva. He hadn't imagined how things would turn out when he woke up in the morning. First large-scale attack, and then a personal attack on his character and the public outlook. Why are you telling me this? He asked, trying to disguise the clear comfort he felt. He didn't want to do a very good job on doing so. Ghost took a moment to answer. Really, why was he doing that? Why was he telling them that? The logical choice was to simply say nothing and strike at any time, without the target and slightest knowledge of its motives. To make the justice simple and swift, to make the punishment for his crimes. That was a logical choice, the choice of his agent he was created to be. It was easy to simply hide his real intentions or trick someone into killing him later. He could fool the security guards and kill the frickin' president the next morning, if he wanted to. So why? I don't usually do this. Normally I would have finished with Umbrella and Albert and killed you in the end, exposing your crimes. But I respect the idea behind BSAA. I respect that they provided the positive view of the population, and above all, O'Brien, I respect Chris, he explained, lowering the screen on his laptop and putting the device back in his backpack. I respect the principles and the extent. I know he's practically incorruptible, and I know he sees you as a good friend. Out of respect of him and your friendship, I'm giving you a second chance here, doing the right things. He raised his head and stared deep into O'Brien's eyes. He knew why, because he was getting soft. He was feeling empathy again, feeling the second chance was a humane thing to do. And while he could give out anything cruel, cold, and unbeatable again, he was feeling so good about not having to take another life. If O'Brien took the right path, there would be no need to kill him, and that pleased Leon. I don't think I need to say this, but I can wipe you and your organization out in the blink of an eye. One day, that's all. So don't try anything against me. Trust me when I say that you don't want to be taking that risk, Ghost said, picking up the small projector and placing it in his backpack as well, heading towards the exit of the tent soon after, without taking his eyes off of O'Brien, who looked cornered, not knowing how to react or where to go at the moment. Ghost stopped in front of them before leaving the tent completely. In the distance he could hear a noise of people around him. He didn't want to stand there and be seen by any more than necessary. Don't make me be wrong about this, was all he said before turning around, walking away at a calm pace, leaving behind a nervous and relieved O'Brien at the same time. Sighing somewhat lazily, Sherry rolled over in her bed and scratched her eyes with her hands. The alarm clock next to her beeped annoyingly. The girl grunted angrily and turned over, turning off the alarm clock and staring at the ceiling with a distant look. Her eyes went to the clock on her cell phone read 7:50 in the morning. She felt that she hadn't rested very well. Getting up, the girl straightened for her shirt and walked barefoot to the bathroom, her eyes only making a little more notice in the hotel room she was in. It was a simple room, a single bed next to a desk. There was a closet to the left, a small television on the table next to her bed. Sherry ran her hand through her hair and undressed while she reached the bathroom. Her eyes then focused on the reflection in her mirror. She looked slightly tired, with dark circles under her eyes. Despite the tiredness, her body was fine. Her regeneration had taken care of any major injuries that she had suffered at some point. She no longer wanted to worry about such things. The girl took a cold shower, and returned to her room. Her clothes changed. She picked up her backpack and left the room. She would have preferred to stay in one of the temporary tents, since she might need help during the fight, but everyone in the medical ward advised her to spend the night in a nearby hotel. She, Claire, and Redfield, a few rooms down the corridor. Raising her cell phone, she looked down at the hotel corridor towards the cafeteria to have breakfast. Claire had texted that she left early. Knowing the other older woman, Sherry would have said she had trouble sleeping if she had slept at all. With her tray and food in hand, she sat alone at the table further away and began to eat occasionally while glancing at her cell phone. No messages from Claire, and a message from Chris asking how she was and saying that he had a few new goals with Albert. She didn't have to think too hard to know that Ghost was involved. And speaking of Ghost, her eyes went to the large television attached to the wall on the opposite. It was a news report about the previous day's tragedy. The images show the city destroyed, biological weapons attacking civilians, destroying cars, the real chaos captured by both ordinary people's cell phones, and by helicopter images from journalists who had been allowed to accompany the helicopters and military vehicles into the city. She watched the news for some few moments, noticing some people talking to each other in almost disbelief, concerned distress on their faces as they asked themselves, what if it happened there too? The scenes changed from the images captured by the cameraman from a group of field journalists. The image showed civilians running desperately towards the stadium, only to come face to face with the huge tyrant. Sherry sighed as she watched the deaths like that take place in front of the camera, blurred from the form of censorship because she was on the free-to-free air on TV. She watched carefully as the civilians ran away, only to run into a group of lickers. Considering the situation, it was almost a miracle that they managed to escape unharmed. Of course, Dad, because of the fact they were saved by the masked agent. Sherry's eyes widened slightly as the camera focused on Ghost, fighting the lickers with superhuman abilities and agility. Some of the people watching stared curiosity, confusion, and surprise as Ghost dodged the fatal attacks that he had encountered, and with a pistol with his knife. Sherry swallowed some of her food. Ghost didn't seem to be the type of one to be seen, and that would certainly draw attention to him. The footage ended with the cameraman filming Ghost walking towards the huge tyrant behind him. The newscast raised questions like, who was he? What organization was he part of? There was no identification stamp, badge, or logo from any known association. At the moment, the only speculated was that part of this separate special forces group. She lowered her head a little, and she imagined that Ghost wouldn't be too happy about it. What kind of consequences could this have for him? Well, considering that they didn't have even the slightest information about him, she would have to say maybe it didn't matter that much. She hoped. She finished her breakfast and put her backpack on her back. After checking out at the reception, she left the hotel and walked down sideways towards the temporary camp for the civilians. That day, in close critical condition, could be taken to a private hospital. The others would be taken to temporary homes and apartments until further orders had arrived from the message that Chris had sent her. The city could be back on its feet. They could rebuild, which was great. She doubted that the other civilians would want to go back there. Even though it was her home, they would probably be too affected to hear that. She didn't know what it was going to be like that, for the terrorists saved together and the government would not leave them helpless. But the situation was more complicated than that. She entered the camp, running her eyes over the vehicles, leaving the site and entering the city. There were some reporters. There's soldiers, some police, ambulances, medical teams, TerraSafe. Hell, it seemed like everyone had gathered around together. She didn't necessarily need to be there. She could have stayed at the hotel and rested a little longer, but she couldn't. Her mind wouldn't let her. Her coincidence wouldn't let her. So she just decided to keep that any way she could. Whatever it was, changing bandages, bringing food, water, giving medicine, whatever they needed, she was willing to help. The hours had passed without her noticing. She was the only camp to eat. Almost 9 hours later, she arrived. When she returned, she noticed a drastic decrease in numbers of people inside. Civilians were taken to the housing outside the city. The others were transported to a different tents, where they would stay indefinitely. While some of the journalists were leaving the area, others were standing around with cups of coffee in their hands. It had been a busy day for everyone. Lightly massaging her shoulder, the girl began to walk around the camp, checking on how things were going. TerraSafe was around. Technically, her shift was over, but considering that her home, Chris's house, was abandoned in the attacked town, she had nowhere to go but the hotel. She wasn't too keen on staying there alone again. Without realizing it, she ended up moving a little away from the camp. A place where they were staying was outside of Philadelphia, but it was close to some other places. There was a school 13 kilometers from the north, a golf course 22 kilometers in the south, and in the camp was the highway. Behind it all was a small forest that led to one of the noble neighborhoods, almost 10 kilometers away. The open space between the trees, she sighed in relief at the silence had taken over. The noise polluted from them before her head hurt. She picked up her cell phone and read some of the messages. Claire, I'm on my way to the terrorist safe building there with some civilians. I may be gone for a while. Anna and Maura are with me. Barry sent you a hug. Sherry, send him one too. She leaned against the trunk of one of the trees. Chris, Sherry, how are you? I'm meeting with O'Brien and the DSO. As I said, we're in charge of sweeping the city. I hope you're all right. Don't push yourself too hard. Chris, we took a short break. Then we'll be out again. It looks like there is some game with infected still in place, but we'll deal with them. You better answer me, brat, or when I get there, I'll make you and Claire sleep together. Don't play games. Sherry smiled slightly and shook her head. She had never changed. Sherry, hi, I was busy helping the civilians today. I didn't even pick up my cell phone, so I didn't see your messages. Sherry, I'll stop messing with you if you stop playing with Jill. Chris is typing. Chris, grounded. Sherry laughed a little louder. Good to see you smiling, little Redfield. Sherry was startled by the sudden voice next to her, and her eyes widened as the masked agent, a few steps from where she stood. She didn't even hear him coming. Jesus, how did you manage to walk through the dry leaves without making a sound? She asked, and he just shrugged and took a few steps closer. You weren't paying attention to me, so it was easier to get closer. She stared at him. Well, it's good to see you. I figured you'd be around, but I didn't realize you were in the camp, she said, and Ghost looked around calmly and played with his knife between his fingers masterfully. I'm in that private BSAA tent, he said, pointing to a little further away, about 100 and 110 meters away. Chris arranged it for me. I'd figured you'd be far away, you know, with all the attention you drew. By the way, how does it feel being on the big topic on the news? She asked, crossing her arms and leaning against the tree behind her. It's uncomfortable, but it's nothing serious. Sherry let out a nasal laugh. Somehow he knew it was the exact answer he would say. Oh, and about the gun you gave me? It's with Chris. If you want it back, you'll have to... No, relax. You can keep it, he interrupted her. And the girl stared at him, blinking a few times in confusion. Really? Like, really? That's certainly no ordinary weapon. Are you sure? She asked, and he just shook his head. Consider it a gift. I'll do my best to not let another attack happen like that again. But you better be prepared for anything with the best equipment, he said, replied, throwing his knife up and twirling in his fingers after picking it up again. Okay, thanks. I don't know how exactly I'm going to keep it, but thanks, he snorted. Ordinary bullets will work too, don't worry, he replied, and Sherry looked at him with a curious face. Are you all right? She asked, making him look at her. It's probably a stupid question, but you were up against a tyrant in the stadium, and I don't know. It's hard to think that everyone would be intact afterwards. He shook his head in understanding and sighed slightly. I'm fine. That wasn't the first, and maybe it won't be the last tyrant I face, he replied, swinging his knife between his fingers again, throwing it and spinning it in the air. You make it look so easy, she said, and he looked at her with one eyebrow raised under his mask. Knives aren't my specialty. And what's your specialty be? He asked, and she bowed her head thoughtfully. I don't think I have one. I'm good at everything, but that's pretty much it. I don't excel in everything, she replied, and Ghost stopped playing with his blade. You don't have anything to be great at fighting, Sherry. That's not you. You're great at looking after others, helping them, protecting them. She let out a nasal laugh. You talk just like Chris, she said, raising her head, sighing. I don't know. I always feel like I could do more. The girl just stared at the camp with a distant look, obvious to Ghost's gaze on her. I could teach you a thing or two. He drew his voice, her attention in his direction. She stared at him with eyebrows arched. If you like, of course. She looked at him curiously. She knew that he helped Claire in his own way, but he had helped her nonetheless. After that conversation, they didn't have any time alone. He was different. She held back a small smile that she saw because of her. She was making a difference in his life. Maybe it wasn't a lost cause. Of course, he said, and he nodded before turning and walking towards the forest. She followed him, staring back at him with curiosity. I believe it was Chris who had trained you, right? The way you handle the gun is similar to his, he said, following her to a small opening among the trees. Yes, him and Claire, actually, she said, stopping when she saw that he had turned in their direction. To what level they teach you with the knife? He asked, throwing the knife into the air, spinning around in motion, changing for the posture in his grip. Military basics, I guess. We focus more on hand-to-hand more than anything with the knife. To tell you the truth, she said, taking her combat knife from her waist. It was a little shorter than Ghost's, and the blade was black instead of silver. A knife, like any other weapon which you have a level of mastery, could be any extension of her body. Knives are perfect for close combat, and even depending medium range, but they are fast and precise and can prevent a situation from becoming too tight with just one well-trimmed move. Most of the time, the secret lies within the drawing speed, he said, throwing his knife into his hand with the other with a certain speed. Against a human being? Well, all you need to do is get close enough, break into his zone, try to get to your weapon, he said, and Sherry quickly did so, putting her hand to the handle of her pistol and pulling it out of her waistband. But before she could even raise her arm, she felt this icy blade of her ghost's knife against her neck. She blinked a few times in surprise. She hadn't seen him approach and was just about 7 paces away. Be quick, and you'll eliminate your opponent before he can even raise his weapon. Unlike Chris, you're small, which means you're agile and fast, so use that to your advantage. If you can't and he reacts, use his momentum against him and attack me, he said. And Sherry advances with her knife in an attempt to horizontal cut with the left of the saber grip. Ghost quickly repelled the girl's attack by crashing his blade into hers, controlling the rotation of his arm, throw the girl's limbs to the side, causing her to step to the side and tried to help keep her balance, giving Ghost the opening to place his knife against the girl's neck once again. You control the fight. Control your opponent's movements, and he won't be able to touch you. Attack me again. Sherry stepped and attacked again, this time a vertical slash from the bottom to top. Ghost again repelled the girl's attack by forcing the blade against hers, causing her arm to be thrown to the side. I barely used any force in that movement, left you with your guard open. That's an important part. Use your opponent's speed and strength against him. Defend yourself, he said, dropping the knife and turning his body, still catching in the air with his hand, attempting to slash in the attack on the girl with the hammer grip. Sherry's eyes widened slightly at Ghost's speed as she reacted, imitating his move and attacking the knife with hers, causing the agent's movement to be interrupted. He was serious. He wasn't taking it easy because it was training. He didn't seem to be afraid of hurting her. In a way, she would regenerate in almost an injury away. Quickly, the girl counterattacked by dropping her knife, turning to their body, catching the blade on the other hand, imitating the same movement as Ghost, who widened his eyes slightly and blocked her attack with his blade. His eyes both met hers, both shining brightly, and a smile appeared on Sherry's lips. Be careful, I'm a fast learner, she said. Ghost relaxed his posture slightly while still staring at her. I could see that. I guess the little flower still has thorns, huh? Sherry widened her eyes slightly and grimaced. Ah, do you remember that? He let out a nasal laugh. My memory hasn't been erased, Sherry. I remember everything, he said. And Sherry just stared at him for a few moments, his knife lowered, but short, brief training session being put aside. Really? I'm sorry to inform you, but I'm not the Terminator team now. I'm still like Rambo, though. She let out a nasal laugh. Well, there's nothing I can do about having a terrible taste, he joked. Sherry shook her head and patted him lightly on the shoulder. Ghost stared at her on the floor for a few moments and sighed slightly, feeling the girl's gaze at him all the time. You look troubled. Her voice snapped him out of his thoughts, and he blinked a few times as he looked away, putting his knife back in his sheath. I've been thinking recently. I've been thinking about the things I have fought before. I act in a very way that I would never act in any other circumstances, and it's because of you, he said, looking at the girl in the eye. Every time I'm around you, I say more than 5 minutes I would have said months. I've always regretted it. The girl swallowed some saliva because his intense gaze It seemed like nothing had happened even though he didn't mean it. His intense gaze seemed to engulf her entire body. But at the same time, it doesn't seem so bad. Part of me likes it, he said, and Sherry took a step closer. So what do you think, Ghost? Is it a good or bad thing? She asked, and he lowered his head for a few moments, staring at the ground. To be honest with himself, he no longer knew. It was all two sides that were in conflict, and they were both right.